I never thought I'd need a badge to defend my farm. But when Karen from the HOA called 911 on me, that's exactly what I showed her. The look on her face when I pulled out my warrant was the last thing she ever expected. My name is David Hayes. I didn't grow up as a farmer. I spent years in the military serving as a Navy SEAL. The uniform no longer defines me, but it's a part of who I am. Something I carry quietly, like an unspoken promise. And when I inherited this farm, it wasn't just a piece of land to me. It was a place to find peace, to escape the noise, to return to roots that ran deeper than any title or rank I'd ever held. But peace is a fragile thing. I should have known better than to think it could last. From the moment Karen showed up, all suited up with her HOA clipboard and her righteous attitude, I knew she wasn't here to talk. This was more than just a neighbor's complaint. She wanted to take what was mine, and she wasn't going to. Stop until she did. And that's when she made the mistake that would change everything. When she called 911, she thought she was calling in the cavalry to get me off my land. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't just a farmer. I wasn't just some man she could push around with her HOA rules and her threats. I was someone who'd been trained to make people disappear from problems, professionally. The badge I pulled out wasn't for show, and the warrant wasn't a suggestion. It was the beginning of her end. My name is David Hayes. I wasn't always a man who had to carry a badge to get respect. But then, I wasn't always a farmer either. Before the soil, before the quiet mornings with the rooster crowing, I wore a uniform. Navy SEALs don't need a lot of introduction. My past is a shadow. That sticks, but it's not what defines me now. This farm, my farm, is everything. It's the land I inherited from my father. A patch of earth as old as the community around it. People like me, we don't come to places like this for the glamour. We come for peace. We come to grow, to restore, to keep a part of the world steady, amidst all the chaos. For me, it's more than just dirt and crops. It's home. It's where I can breathe without looking over my shoulder, but peace has a way of being tested. And when it is, the quietest of moments can unravel you entirely. It was late one afternoon when it started. The sun was dipping behind the hill, the golden hue spilling across the rows of corn and the old barn I'd spent the last decade restoring. I was checking the livestock, listening to the rhythmic sound of hooves on the dirt when I saw her. Karen. I'd never caught her name, but everyone knew her. Everyone had been threatened by her. She was standing at the end of my long driveway, arms crossed and her face tight with the same judgment I'd seen from other neighbors when they passed by. They didn't like my farm. They didn't like how it stood out against the pristine houses, the manicured lawns, and the suffocating regulations of the homeowners association. It was always the same, complaints about the nuisance my farm represented, the noise, the smell, the way the barn was a little too rustic, a little too much like something out of the past. They never understood that a place like this doesn't conform to their cookie-cutter ideas of what a community should be. But Karen, she took it a step further. I had ignored her, like I'd ignored the others, hoping that she'd eventually find a new target. But today, as I walked toward the barn, I could see her waiting, watching, and she didn't look like she was here to complain this time. She looked like she was ready to escalate it. She must have thought I was just another farmer to push around. Another set of hands too tired to fight back. Her eyes locked on me as I neared, and I could see her chest rise with a deep breath. The game was about to change. "David Hayes," she called out, her voice crisp, commanding. "I'm with the Homeowners Association. I'm warning you, this farm of yours is a violation of every ordinance in this town. You need to shut this down, or I'll be forced to call authorities." I raised an eyebrow. "Karen, you can call anyone you like, but this is my land, and you don't have any say in how I run it." Her lips twisted in a thin smile. "We'll see about that. You're breaking every rule, and I've had enough. I've already contacted the authorities. You'll be hearing from them." She turned away, her heels clicking against the gravel, like she had just won some quiet battle. But I knew something she didn't. I didn't need to be intimidated. This was my land, and I had no plans of letting anyone, least of all someone like her, bully me off it. A few minutes later, I saw her walking back toward the gate, her phone in hand. I couldn't make out the conversation, but I didn't need to. She was dialing 911. She was serious. And then I saw it, the red and blue lights in the distance. The sirens grew louder as they neared my property. My mind clicked into gear. This wasn't just about a petty complaint. This was something bigger, something more personal. I stood still, my hands resting in the pockets of my old jacket. There was no anger in me, no rush to confront her head-on, just quiet certainty. She didn't know who she was dealing with. As the police car rolled up, I could hear Karen's voice from behind me. Her words were sharp, accusing. "That man over there, he's breaking every zoning law. He's not even allowed to farm. I want him arrested." The officer looked at her first, then to me. But I didn't flinch. I didn't even move. "Ma'am," I said quietly, pulling my wallet from my pocket and flashing my badge. "I'm the one you need to be talking to." The officer's eyes shifted from the badge to Karen. She was already fuming, her face redder than I'd ever seen it, her mouth open in shock. "Who are you?" she demanded. The officer didn't wait for an answer. "Ma'am, you're under arrest." Karen's jaw dropped. But it wasn't her shock that mattered. It wasn't the arrest or the arresting officer. What mattered was the moment I held the warrant in front of her face. My quiet action had just put her on the defensive, but she didn't know yet how far this was going to go. And Karen, with all her arrogance, still didn't know the whole truth. I wasn't just the farmer on her radar anymore. Now, I was a man with the law on his side, and she had no idea how deep the system went. This was about to get a whole lot worse for her. But I wasn't angry. I wasn't even frustrated. I was just doing what needed to be done. Because in the end, this was never about a farm. It was about standing my ground, quietly, with purpose, and showing Karen that sometimes the law is all the weapon you need. And she was about to learn just how powerful that weapon really was. I didn't say anything as Karen's face turned a shade of crimson. The officer, clearly caught off guard by the sudden change in power dynamics, looked between the two of us before turning his attention back to her. Karen opened her mouth to speak again, but I beat her to it. "You're under arrest, ma'am," I said, my voice steady. I didn't need to raise it. The silence around us felt louder than any words I could have said. "You've been harassing me for months, and now you've escalated things by involving the authorities with false claims." Her eyes widened, and she took a half step back, clearly stunned by the turn of events. You can't do this." "I'm just trying to protect this community from your mess of a farm." The officer's hand hovered uncertainly on his holster, but I could see him processing what I had just said. He glanced down at the warrant in my hand and read it quickly. I could almost hear his brain working, piecing together the larger story. "Ma'am, you need to come with me," he said. But Karen wasn't finished. She wasn't about to let go of her perceived power so easily. "This is a mistake," she insisted, her voice rising. "This farm isn't zoned for agriculture. It's a violation of everything this community stands for. You don't have the right—" "Karen," I interrupted, my tone sharper now. "I suggest you calm down before this gets any worse for you." I watched her face flush again, her hands trembling as she tried to grasp the magnitude of the situation. She had no idea what was happening. This wasn't just about her call to 911 anymore. This wasn't even about the land itself. This was the first real crack in the facade of the HOA's operation, and it was only the beginning. After she was escorted away, I took a moment to gather myself. The officer, his face neutral, gave me a brief nod of understanding before he turned to follow her. I didn't feel any satisfaction from her arrest. No sense of triumph or relief. This wasn't a personal vendetta. This was something bigger. This was about taking down a system that believed it could crush people under its weight without consequences. I had known for months that the HOA was a cancer in this community, but it wasn't until Karen's call that I truly understood the extent of their corruption. She had no idea what she had just unleashed by calling the police. But that call wasn't just an attempt to run me out of town. It was part of a much larger scheme. Later that night, I sat down at my old desk, the one I'd inherited from my father. The soft glow of the desk lamp illuminated the stack of papers and old maps. The more I thought about the events of the day, the more I realized that Karen wasn't the only one I needed to worry about. She was just the loudest voice in a chorus of corruption that had been growing for years. The HOA wasn't just a group of people who hated farms like mine. They were a machine, a deeply entrenched system of greed, manipulation, and control. Karen had been their foot soldier, a pawn in a much larger game. I took a deep breath and started digging. I spent the next several hours poring over records, zoning laws, land deeds, HOA bylaws. At first, it was just a few irregularities that caught my eye. Documents filed at odd hours, changes to land usage that didn't make sense, and notices that never seemed to get delivered to the right people. But the deeper I dug, the more unsettling it became. Emails started showing up in my search, ones I was never supposed to see. There were whispers of kickbacks, of adjustments made to property values to favor certain developers, all signed off by the very people I'd been dealing with for months. I printed the most damning ones and laid them out across the table. But the real shock came when I found the zoning discrepancy, a legal loophole they had been using to get farmers and landowners to sell their property under duress, using threats of illegal zoning violations. That was it. That was the key. They weren't just harassing me because of my farm. They were targeting anyone they could force out. I had what I needed. The pieces were falling into place, but I knew it wasn't enough just to have the documents. I needed a plan. I needed to make sure the entire HOA structure crumbled under the weight of its own lies. By the time I looked up, the sun was starting to rise again. I'd barely slept. But I didn't need rest. I had a strategy forming in my mind. And it was more than just exposing a few bad apples. This was about making sure the system couldn't hurt anyone else again. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Charlie?" I asked when he answered. "I need your help." Charlie was a lawyer, a good one, and someone I'd worked with during my time in the service. If anyone could help me navigate the legal maze of the HOA, it was him. "I've got evidence. I've got everything I need. But I need your expertise to make sure it all falls apart. You in?" His voice was steady, confident. "You know I am. Let's take them down." That was all I needed to hear. The next phase was about to begin, and nothing, not even Karen, could stop it now. The strategy was in motion. I wasn't waiting around to see if Karen would spin a new lie or send a fresh wave of threats my way. She had already shown her hand, and now it was my turn to play. The following weeks were a blur of quiet moves, legal maneuvers, and strategic leaks. Charlie had taken the reins on the legal front, diving headfirst into the HOA's public records, unearthing even more damaging documents. We discovered that they had been using illegal zoning changes to pressure homeowners into selling their land at a loss. Some homeowners were threatened with demolition orders if they didn't comply. Others had been manipulated with false promises of community improvements that never materialized. Charlie worked his magic, drafting letters to local authorities, alerting them to the fraudulent activities within the HOA. He made sure we covered every legal base, ensuring that when the time came, the HOA couldn't wiggle out of this mess. But it wasn't just the law that was on our side. I knew how to expose corruption. I'd seen it up close, learned how to uncover its cracks and weaknesses. I had a military mind, calm under pressure, focused on the long-term game. This was a battle of attrition, and I wasn't going to rush it. So, while Charlie worked behind the scenes, I took a different approach. I went to the local news. One evening, I reached out to an old contact from my days in the service, a reporter who had always had a nose for a good story. I made sure he understood exactly what was at stake. "Remember that farm I told you about? The one in the middle of the HOA mess?" I said, my voice steady as I outlined everything I had found. "I've got the documents. I've got the proof. You won't believe the full extent of what they've been doing, but they're about to be exposed." The reporter was skeptical at first, but as I laid out the facts, his tone shifted. "You're serious, aren't you?" "I'm dead serious," I said, my eyes narrowing. "And if you want the story of a lifetime, you're going to need to be as serious as I am." The next day, my phone rang. It was him, confirming the interview. The interview turned into a full-blown exposé, complete with hidden cameras, leaked, documents and statements from other victims who had suffered at the hands of the HOA. The story hit the news like a tidal wave. Headlines blared across local stations, online blogs, and social media. The HOA's tactics were laid bare for the entire town to see. But Karen wasn't finished yet. She hadn't expected this. She thought she could silence me with a phone call, a complaint, and a few threats. She underestimated the system we were fighting against, and she underestimated me. 2 days after the story broke, Karen showed up again. This time, it wasn't just her clipboard and her well-practiced smile. She was flanked by 2 men in suits, each carrying their own stack of paperwork. Her eyes scanned the scene, landing on me where I stood outside my barn, arms crossed, watching. Her approach. "You," she spat, the venom in her voice unmistakable, "are going to regret this." I didn't move, didn't flinch. The 2 men in suits, attorneys, I assumed, started talking, their words coming fast and furious. "You've opened up a can of worms here," one of them said, clearly trying to intimidate me. "The HOA has plenty of legal resources at its disposal. We'll be taking you to court for defamation if you don't stop spreading these lies." I raised an eyebrow, cutting through their words with one simple sentence. "If you really think this is a defamation issue, then you clearly haven't seen what I've got in my hands." I pulled out the stack of evidence I had been collecting for weeks, the emails, the zoning changes, the falsified documents, the fraudulent property valuations. "You'll need more than a lawyer to cover this up. This isn't just a defamation case. This is fraud, racketeering, and extortion." Karen's face went white as she glanced at the papers, then back at me. She didn't speak for a moment, clearly processing the weight of what I had just said. The 2 men beside her shifted uncomfortably, their faces telling the same story. They knew they were standing on the edge of a cliff. "Let's not make this harder than it has to be," I continued, my voice calm but firm. "You can walk away, or you can keep digging your own grave. Your choice." They all stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do next. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. But instead of answering, Karen turned on her heel and stormed off, her lawyers trailing behind her like obedient shadows. The next few hours were filled with a flurry of phone calls, lawyers, reporters, even other HOA members reaching out to ask what was going on. But it didn't matter what they said. The truth had already been set in motion, and it was a force none of them could stop. The media was still buzzing with the story. Charlie had already set up meetings with local investigators, and rumors were spreading fast that the HOA was in danger of losing its nonprofit status due to the corruption that was now coming to light. As for Karen, she knew the game was over. She had tried to intimidate me, but now it was her turn to be the one on the defensive. Within days, the press conference she had planned to spin the story back in her favor turned into a disaster. She stammered through questions, her lawyers, fumbling through responses. For once, the facade cracked. And in that crack, the truth poured out. The entire town was watching. The pressure was mounting, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The wind felt different that morning, lighter, sharper, like the air itself had been holding its breath for months and was finally allowed to exhale. A week after the press conference collapsed, the HOA board voted, quietly and behind closed, arse to remove Karen as president. No ceremony, no statement. Just a single email sent out at 2:03 a.m., stripped of her name like a forgotten typo. She was gone, but I didn't celebrate. That wasn't the point. I stood by the fence line of my farm that morning, sipping coffee as the sun cracked over the horizon, the same spot where Karen had once stood, pretending to be in charge. Now the only sounds were the soft rustling of chickens in their coop and the rhythmic thud of my horse's hooves on the morning soil. Peace had returned, but not by chance. The aftermath was quiet, but transformative. Within days of Karen's removal, several more board members resigned. One of them, a nervous man named Travis, emailed Charlie and confessed to everything. He admitted they'd been pushed to approve emergency bylaws that Karen herself had drafted, bypassing homeowner votes, enforcing illegal fees, and sanctioning aggressive trespasses like the one on my property. His statement was signed, notarized, and handed straight to the county investigator. Then came the ripple effects. The county planning board froze all HOA applications and ordered a full audit of their financials. It wasn't just my case anymore. Dozens of homeowners came forward. Some had paid thousands in landscape violations for native plants. Others had been denied disability accommodations, evicted, or fined into foreclosure. A retired school teacher who lived 3 streets over told reporters through tears that she'd almost sold her home under pressure from fake zoning letters. They had no idea someone was running a coordinated campaign to drive out longtime owners and gentrify the entire development. But now they knew. As investigations mounted, civil suits began. A joint class action case formed with over 30 plaintiffs. Charlie joined as co-counsel. The HOA's legal fund dried up in a month. And Karen? 2 weeks after her downfall, she was served at her new rental apartment, far from the Lakeview home she'd once ruled like a monarch. The warrant I handed her wasn't just poetic, it was precise: fraud, trespassing, harassment, abuse of authority under a civil organization. She'd violated enough laws to warrant a full criminal case. The deputies did their job by the book, but I'll never forget the look on her face when she opened that door. Barefoot, robe hanging off her shoulder, not a clipboard in sight. She looked up. Her voice trembled. "You?" I nodded, badge visible, on my vest, and handed her the folder. "This is your copy," I said quietly. "For the record." She opened it. Her hand began to shake. She looked at the first page, the charges, and then up at me. "You set me up." I didn't smile, didn't flinch. "No," I said. "You did that yourself. I just turned the lights on." She was arrested that afternoon, quietly. No cuffs needed, just silence and consequence. By the time the trial date was announced, her name was radioactive. No law firm in 3 counties would touch her case. She pleaded out, hoping for mercy. But the judge, an old rancher's son, wasn't moved by crocodile tears. "Power," he said during sentencing, "isn't the problem. It's the people who think they own it." She got 18 months probation, community service, and a permanent bar from serving on any residential board. Her criminal record would follow her longer than any title ever could. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Because this wasn't just about punishment. It was about protection. The county enacted new ordinances within months, stripping HOAs of certain unilateral powers, enforcing oversight committees, and ensuring all enforcement actions required public votes and transparency. Karen's case became a test case taught at legal seminars statewide: how not to run a homeowners association. And the farm, it thrived. Charlie and I co-founded a nonprofit using our settlement share, focused on educating property owners about their rights. We ran monthly workshops right there in the barn, under the very beams Karen once threatened to seize. Local veterans, retired judges, small landowners. We taught them how to read a deed, file a restraining order, challenge zoning abuse. The program became so successful, the county began offering funding. People stopped calling me the guy with the badge. They started calling me the guy who protected his ground, and I kept protecting it. Even years later, when I saw a clipboard in someone's hand, I didn't flinch. I just looked them in the eye, steady as ever. Because I had built something stronger than fences or titles. I had rebuilt the truth. One sunrise, I walked the perimeter with my son. He was older now, steadier. On his legs, he stopped by the fence and pointed. "Dad," he said, "is that the gate where that lady yelled at you?" I looked out across the field. The gate was still there. The fence had been reinforced. A new sign hung on the post. Private agricultural property, protected under state statute. "Yeah," I said, "but she's not here anymore." He was quiet a moment. Then, "Did she get in trouble?" I nodded. "She did." He smiled, small, quiet, and ran ahead. And I stood there, letting the moment settle in my chest. Karen thought she could bend the law to her will. She thought a badge could be mocked, that land could be bullied, that power meant control. She was wrong. Because out here, where the fields breathe and the morning frost still clings to the wire, we don't shout. We stand. We hold the line. And when someone calls the law on you, you show them what the law really looks like. They called 911 on my farm, so I showed them my badge and the warrant with their name on it.